I am so excited this week to bring you another episode of Starcross. I am bringing on evolutionary astrologer, 17-time author, and fellow astrologer, Steve Forrest.
Mhm. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on, Steve. This conversation is one that I cannot tell you how excited I am to share with my community. I feel like anytime that I'm getting outreach or having clients come to me for one-on-one sessions, a lot of the time the conversation of fate, destiny, and free will happens to come up in some natural way. And I think with astrology, it's something that's so important to me as a longtime practicing astrologer now that I never want my work to take away from people's ability to trust themselves, their own intuition, to depend on themselves. And I thought there's nobody better to bring on and have this conversation with. So, Steve, before we dive into all of this fun, juicy topic, do you mind just letting my community know a little bit about you, your work, some of the stuff that you're working on?
I'd be delighted to. I fell backwards into astrology. Grew up. I was born in 1949, so 1950s America was kind of science oriented because I was a smart kid. So I was looking through telescopes and doing amateur astronomy, and then. This will sound strange. I bet you'll love it. I'm looking through a telescope at a galaxy, and I get the feeling something is looking back at me.
Whoa.
That eerie feeling you get when somebody's eyes are on you in a cafe or something. And I don't mean the little green men, although I suspect there's little green men and women, out there too. But that the galaxy itself was a conscious thing. And that was what was looking back at me. Totally unscientific attitude that pretty quickly led me into studying astrology. The idea that the universe is a great mind and we are in communication with it. That's really the magic of the whole thing right there.
Absolutely. And it's such a powerful thing too. I know even in kind of Kabbalic or Judaism that there's this idea of the eye of God and looking into the eye of God as a comparative notion to astrology. So the fact that you had this very individual experience that mirrors ancient ideologies to me is just the reminder to us like no matter where we fall in humanity, there are certain things and truths that we can't escape. So
Yeah.
after you had this moment of feeling that connection, the universe not only being observed by you, but observing you back, how
Yes.
did that lead you from, because I'm also like a straight A student, 4.0 student, like had the math brain and the pattern recognition. So I'm like, I know this from my story, but how did that lead you then into this incredible legacy career with astrology?
Well, yeah, that's a big question, and I appreciate you not limiting me to sound bites, but I also don't want to just do my entire autobiography off the top of my head, which is the right
I I'm a
end.
Scorpio stellium, so I'm all for all of the details.
Okay, yeah, well, let's get juicy. I'm going to start off. Pardon me. Your self-observation that you were a 4.0 student. Me too. And, in conventional society, there's often the attitude that you have to be a little soft in the head to believe in astrology.
Yeah.
I've been in astro world all my life, and there's people I like and people I don't like, and philosophies I disapprove of, and all of that. But there's not many stupid people. To even begin to learn astrology, it requires intelligence. It's a complicated system, and yet, kind of cutting right back into the heart of your question. So I I begin to feel drawn to the possibility of astrology as a way of and reckoning with the idea that there is this consciousness out there and there's
Yeah.
some larger purpose, call it God if you want, manifesting
Hmm.
as the universe. And so I start reading, with all these expectations, and I learn all the Scorpios are sexy but treacherous.
What can you say?
Right, and I'm a Capricorn, so I'm boring and predictable, but will probably get rich. And this is the kind of silliness I'm reading,
Yeah.
and the tension between the sheer stupidity of astrology as I first encountered it on one hand, and the magic and majesty of the universe on the other hand,
Yeah.
created an unsettled feeling in me. And I spent a
Hmm.
long time exploring that. And here, here's here's a key. Again, a little bit of autobiography. I was having my tonsils out kind of late in life. I was like 17 years old, and
Oh.
I was already studying palmistry. That was kind of
Hmm.
how I got into the symbolism. But I'm lying in recuperating from my tonsillectomy. My mom comes in and says, "Can I get you a book?" And I say, "Yeah, get me an astrology book." And she was eyebrows up a little bit, but she was okay. So I'm 17 and I'm reading my first astrology book. It was a terrible thing. Astrology for teens, and all the Scorpios are sexy. The Geminis talk too much, just that kind of stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
still hooked, but I realize there's something more systematic than saying these books are stupid. There's a more systematic error. And I thought about it for about 20 years while my
Hmm.
progressed Mercury was retrograde. And then
Of
my
course.
Mercury stopped, and it was time to figure out what I had figured out. And the first line of my first book, which I wrote as Mercury turned direct, was people change. Yet one assumption runs through astrological literature like a virus, and that's that people do not change. That is the heart of the system that we're capable of.
Yes.
Now, I met some Scorpios who were sexy but treacherous, where that stuff was real. And I met some Scorpios who looked me right in the eye and told the truth,
Yeah.
which is pretty sexy too. And so I began, like some of the astrologers of that era, to think, well, yeah, there's good Scorpios and bad Scorpios. But
Right.
then the magic happened for me. I realized that some of those Scorpios who were sexy but treacherous seemed to gradually be becoming more honest, direct, and real, and that we are capable of evolution. And that is the most
Absolutely.
obvious fact about life. And to make astrology resonant with life, it has to reflect change. We can't delineate characters anymore. We have to talk about the birth chart as a path rather than a prison.
Yes. Steve, I can't tell you how much I resonate with that sentiment as well, because it is so scientific in its stasis. It's the variable, this person changing in their own cyclical way,
Mhm.
while they're also a part of a much larger cycle of humanity. Like that
Yeah,
same birth chart, I say same, but very similar birth chart could have happened 150 years ago. But because of how much we as a society and the way that we engage with one another has changed, now
yeah,
it's applying in such a different way. So it's like your approach of evolutionary astrology is one that has influenced my own approach through your
yeah,
teachings, through your lessons, through what you have shared, because it's not just the person being stuck in the box. It's understanding that that person is ever changing, but they're also within the box of whatever is happening now,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is also
exactly,
actively
exactly.
changing.
Yes, yes. And that box is like the alchemical cauldron of experience. And we in the cauldron were changed, maybe, maybe. I like to say maybe because growth is optional. You got to volunteer
Yep,
for it. And, people can have experience after experience and learn nothing,
yep,
or we can be burning evolutionary rocket fuel. You brought up the words fate and destiny, two of my favorites.
yep,
I use them somewhat idiosyncratically. I don't have much use for the word fate. It feels too
yep,
depressing and too rigid. But a line I'll often use is I'll say, it's your fate to face certain questions and certain possibilities at a given moment in your life. That's your
yep,
fate. The universe gives you those questions and possibilities. They're going to be in your face and up your nose. They'll be right there. And then, but they're questions. And everything that's truly a question has more than one answer. And so there's dumb answers and healthy answers, and of course a lot of shades of gray in between. My task as an astrologer, as an astrological counselor, isn't to
hmm
predict how people are going to answer, but to coach them to talk about the best answers. And I guess I'd say if you answer the questions fate presents correctly, you will realize your destiny. I use destiny is kind of a higher word for me.
yes. I honestly, I couldn't have said it better. I have conversations even in my own personal life about this and had a friend of mine who I would say is spiritual, but hasn't made a career out of it, maybe doesn't engage in it every day, doesn't tie everything back to this. But we had sat long enough over coffee and he asks, "Do you believe in fate?" And I laughed to myself knowing that we were going to have this conversation about a week and a half later. So I, of course, in my very Virgo sun brain, go and look up the definition of fate. So I wanted to share it on this episode for anybody listening that fate is defined as the development of events beyond a person's control, regarded as determined by a supernatural power. And I think when you're talking about this and how we, as the human, as the one experiencing life, run up against fate almost like it's a different being, like it's a separate entity. And then we have, with our free will, the option of answering to fate in so many various ways. That truly is how I think about it. I think, and he kind of pushed back and challenged me and was like, well, do you think that certain relationships are fated? Do you think that certain experiences are fated? Do you think certain paths in our career where we live are fated? And my personal take, and I would love to hear yours as well, is that the depth of fate is different for each relationship, whether that be with another person, another experience, or another place. So, almost as if you could make one of those various answers or decisions with fate, and some things are inevitably going to happen in multiple of those pathways. Like
Yeah,
some
yeah,
of those things are more deeply fated than others, but I'm curious to hear your
yeah.
take on that.
Yeah, I like it. I'd be in harmony with what you're saying. I do think again, I always choke a little when I'm about to say the word fate because I've spent my career kind of railing against fatalistic astrology.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say it's your fate to meet certain people in this lifetime, with whom, in my view, you have unresolved karma. And
Mm,
if you've got something, well, let me just launch into that. If if you're breaking up with somebody, we've all been
mhm,
through that horrible, horrible time, and so a big breakup, and you got a friend who's got a little metaphysics in her, and
mhm,
she offers you some advice. You should just work it out with him, or you're just going to have to meet again next time in high school, reincarnation and all of
yep,
that. And there is a certain truth in what your friend is saying. She's saying something naive, but
yeah,
the truth in it is ain't no such thing as unfinished business in this universe. We get away with nothing, put it on the Visa card, God, if we're breaking up with
Such a
somebody.
Capricorn approach.
Yeah. But the point that I'm really driving toward, the what's wrong with your friend's advice, what she's not seeing is in this relationship, the harder you work on it, the worse it gets. We've all been there.
Yes,
We're just spinning our wheels in the mud and two people just hurting each other and driving each other crazy. And the kindest and wisest thing we can possibly do is to say goodbye. Let's stop damaging each other and
yes,
put it on the Visa card, God. Call it karma. It's not a bad move. Sometimes it's the wisest thing you can do. But you will meet again in high school, so to speak, in a future
yes,
life. And that's just guaranteed by the laws of the universe. It's fate that you will meet. But as soon as you meet, you're not in the realm of
yeah.
fate anymore. It's like you're
Hmm.
saying to the universe, like everything else in karma, we're saying to the universe, set it up again. I want another look at it. I think I can do it differently this time.
Yep. And I love that as well because it's not a punishment to run up against a similar situation or to find the same person with a different mask on that's teaching you that same lesson because we always have free will. And I'm such a proponent of instilling in my clients, instilling in anybody that I have, 5 or more seconds of sitting down and conversing with that you know you better than anybody else.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
to sit and think that a self-help book or I hate to say it, but a podcast episode or your friend who has the metaphysics, anybody realistically knows more about you than you if you really quiet out all of the noise and you put your hands to your heart and you listen to that inner voice. I mean, the reason that you have the inner voice and you're the only one that has access to that inner voice is because there is a wisdom in it and you are the only one that knows the actual answer that is going to be correct to the experience that you're running up against.
yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. And that you're absolutely right that the center of self-knowledge is the self. The second best source of self-knowledge is your astrological chart, as far as
Yes.
I'm concerned. And they can kind of correct each other,
Hmm.
because we can be bamboozled into by culture, by family, into thinking of ourselves in a way that doesn't really fit the needs of our soul. And the
Yeah,
chart will kind of help you ask the right questions and get back on a path that works for you.
absolutely. I mean, to me, and I think it goes back to our conversation about astrology being this tool that kind of gives you wings to freedom and it's not a prison,
Yeah,
is anytime that you are learning and having this information reflected back to you. I mean, I always go back to Ram Dass's polishing the mirror. And
yeah,
it's like if we have a clear enough mirror, you understand that birth chart, you understand those placements, you understand the aspects and the house systems and how all of it is playing together. I mean, that's really, I think, exactly like you said, like the clearest indication of who we are, the answers that we have, the information that we can take to move forward in a, a self-assured way and not self-focused in an ego-driven way or an individualistic way. And maybe that's another part of this that we can kind of dive into is how do you help people delineate between that current modern approach of go your own way, don't let anybody hurt you, don't let anybody disrespect you, like so much divisiveness that puts people into the corner of only focusing on themselves and instead help them to understand the more that you understand yourself from this really pure and clear way with your birth chart, that it does nothing but help you go out into the world and connect more deeply. with
Oh,
others.
yeah. I have Scorpio rising and a Scorpio south node, and so sometimes I use pretty strong imagery with people.
Mhm.
It doesn't work too well with the fragile ones, but often when I'm sitting with somebody like first time and 5 minutes into their first encounter with serious astrology, and I try to summarize what we're doing.
Yeah.
I'll dismiss the idea of, here's your personality like a little box, and here's your future like you have nothing to do with it. And then I'll say, this is a plan or a blueprint for a life that if you live it, you win the grand prize. And here comes the Scorpio moment. You lie on your deathbed with a smile on your face
Yeah.
because you know that you have lived the life that you were born to live. There's no greater victory in this world than that,
True.
coming to the end of the trail with that good heart. And for everybody, the path to that good death is different. There's
Yeah.
different things we need to learn. The birth chart helps you sort that out from everything you were mistaught to believe about yourself or about life or the crazy values of your culture or whatever it might be.
Absolutely. It's escaping all of what is placed upon you. It is coming back to the untainted version of yourself, the understanding of yourself at this deep, visceral soul level. And I could not agree with you more. And part of that might be we have nodal opposition, you and I. So I'm Scorpio North Node,
Ah.
Taurus South Node, with my South Node 5 degrees away from my rising.
Perfect. Yeah, so we're with that. I'm 12th house, 6th house too, like
Uh,
you. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it it's so funny to me, and I've had this conversation with a friend of mine who is Taurus, Sun, and Venus, and then I have my Scorpio Venus, and I talk about life in this very morbid kind of death centric way because to me, why would I evade the part of this if we're looking at fate like the start line, a few really major points in between, and then the finish line? You have to have the finish line as well.
Yeah,
That's the whole
yeah,
reason that the spectrum
exactly.
exists.
Uh-huh.
But she, in her very like Taurus, she calls it pleasure push way. She's like, I only want comfort. I only want ease. I only want happiness. I want to talk about life while I have life. And to
Yeah,
me, I think the beautiful part about fate and destiny when we have a conversation like this is that it's within that container of birth at the beginning and death at the end. And the funny thing about what you're saying too, Steve, is like you come out crying, but if you can end it smiling, what an incredible time that you had here.
yeah, yes. What was that all about? I
I
just
love it.
picture somebody on their deathbed and those famous letters WTF question mark forming over their head, like what was that all about? How I mean I can't help but laugh, but it's just so sad. It's so sad that it's almost like you want to close your heart to it and just turn it into a joke.
Hmm.
Life is so precious and so confusing. And
Hmm.
if we're religious, well, the smartest thing I've ever heard about religion goes back to a Christian philosopher named Ronald Niebuhr. This is the most honest thing I've ever heard. Religion makes good people better and bad people worse. You know?
Like an amplifying agent.
Yeah, exactly. Amplifies your nature. And so sometimes it makes good people better, but it
Yeah.
does that by talking about certain like one size fits all moral principles that we're all
Yeah.
better off if we follow. Don't kill people, don't steal, try not to hurt anybody. And that's true of everybody. And that's a good thing. We need to be reminded of it. But then beyond that, your path and my path and everybody else's path, what we need to learn, how we respond to our karmic predicament, it's different. And then the a magical dimension of the universe comes into play. All what I just said about everybody's karma is different, everybody's got different things to learn. Most modern people are going to nod their heads, yeah, that makes sense. But here's where the magic comes in, that you will attract to yourself by random chance, in quotes, really synchronicity, basic laws of the universe. You will attract to yourself opportunities to learn what you need to learn. And that
Yeah.
too that phenomenon is in the category of fate. That
Hmm.
these things are going to happen. A higher magical power, will bring them into your life. Like, for example, somebody with a strong seventh house focus in their chart, often called the house of marriage, as you know, relationships more generally is a better way to think about it. Well, all sorts of partnerships. But if we have a strong seventh house, it's our fate that we're going to be moving along down a path in our life, thinking we know what we're doing, and somebody's going to come along, and suddenly we're living in Rome, or and
My community is going to be listening to this and laughing because I talk about how I have seven planetary bodies in my seventh house, and that it has just been a consistent joke of any time I'm in a relationship or I'm in a new city or I'm with a new job, that it's like, oh, a new version of Megan has sprouted up now.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Now, we could imagine, I should carefully preface this very sincerely. I'm a feminist, loud and proud, I pass all the tests as far as that goes. But every system starts to become a religion, and you got to be a little careful of it. And so we could imagine a woman with a strong seventh house who, let's say, is heterosexual, falls in love with somebody and changes the direction of her life and gets grief about it. Why are you letting some man change your course in life? Well, if you got a big seventh house, your life, the school you're attending is relationship. It is,
Yep.
who to trust and how to trust. And it's like dropping out of school, would be the equivalent of saying, I'm not going to follow somebody to, a new city. And yet another person, let's say a modern woman, born with a massive first house, which is the opposite of the seventh, much more about
Mhm.
independence. She follows some guy to a new city, she's losing the track of her life. And so
Right.
it's not like we say this behavior of following somebody is good or bad. People will stand in judgment of it, but that's madness. That's the insanity of the world. That's just people being judgmental,
Yeah.
indulging in that, because each person's path has to be honored as different and unique. How do we figure out what it is? Introspection, meditation, all of that's very helpful. Astrology sure helps too.
Yes, exactly. The blueprint really to all of it. And I've always expressed it as well as a permission slip to a
Yeah,
lot of things
yeah,
because prior to living in big cities, I was raised in a town with 2,000 people in a state that was 90+% white Caucasian. Most people had a religious background. So there was an extremely homogenous ideology of how to live life and that there was a right way to live life.
yeah, yeah.
And understanding myself through astrology at a very young age, picking up on certain parts of my chart and understanding that there was more than just my sun sign from age 13 onward. I truly believe that it was the permission slip that allowed me to understand that dating as a seventh house stellium was okay, that getting into long-term commitments with jobs or cities or, just committing myself and my life and my energy to something outside of myself truly was something that I was allowed to do, even if it came with the backlash of not again from the friends and the family that I had around me. But I do, Steve, I think that it is such an incredible self-reflective tool and a permission slip and a way to understand these absolutely fated parts of our life or our karma so that we can engage in the difficulty, or as you described, the life lessons, the life school that was meant for us in this incarnation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I have a few that I would like to bring to the table, but are there specific points, planets, aspects, anything that kind of stands out to you when you think fate, when you look at someone's birth chart?
Mhm. Probably the most fatalistic technical dimension of astrology is simply the houses. Because the houses of the chart are very active, very behavioral, so they're
Mhm.
event oriented. And if you got a planets, I mean, a concentration of planets, or the sun or the moon, major energies in a certain house, it's your fate. Again, I choke a little bit, your fate to be faced with a lot of circumstances that are connected with
Yeah,
that house. So fourth house, like home and family, everybody basically has home and family, but it weighs more heavily on some of us than others. And
yeah,
if you got a strong fourth house, family dramas and such are going to press more. We can count on that. And
yeah,
here's an edgy one. This is like all the fatalistic things I might say about a chart. It's probably true in a statistical sense. It will not always be true, with each individual. But
yeah.
eighth house, historically the house of death. It has many other
Hmm.
meanings, but that's probably its most ancient one. And a pattern I've seen over and over again. Somebody with a strong eighth house, uh, significant deaths mark milestones in their lives. So
Yeah.
one might see the early death of a parent, for example, or a
Hmm.
teenager, early 20s, and we're kind of not ready to lose our mom or dad, or a sibling dies, a dear friend is killed in a car accident,
Yep.
things of that nature. And so our fate, but I'm an evolutionary astrologer, so if I see that strong eighth house, and I'd honor all that I just said, yeah, that's probably going to happen. But then I would say, you've come here to become friends with your own death. You've come here
Yeah.
to live in the presence of death, to do
Hmm.
something strangely few people do, which is to live as if you were going to die,
Yeah.
which means we have far less patience for anything that wastes time. We realize how short
Hmm.
life is. And that's what you're really learning. But
Yeah.
occasionally you need a little reminder of that. And when we love somebody, they use the fancy psychoanalytic term here, we have introjected them, they're part of us. And when they die, part of us vicariously goes through death, which is
Yeah.
a good reminder. And so I say to my eighth house client, probably some people will die for you, which is a really
Hmm.
powerful statement. And they die when they're ready to die, because there's no mistakes about that.
Yeah.
But, they die at a time when you need to see a death. You need that kind of reminder. And so
Yeah.
there's a pretty strong element of fate built into that. So that's houses, where your life is
Yeah.
happening, the action of your life.
I have such a potent example with this as well. So one of my first tattoo artists, so I am now home to 14, but one of my first was done by an artist who was just starting out. That happens to be my story. Almost every one of my tattoos is someone who's just freshly out of apprenticeship. My mother is sitting there going, again, and this is my seventh house stellium again, Megan. But he had an eighth house stellium, and the way that he described his work was, I am one of the only types of artists whose art dies with the canvas that I painted on.
Wow. Wow.
And I'll never
Yeah.
forget that.
Yeah, amazing. And it's like it's so obviously true, and yet I've never heard anybody say it before. And that's
Yeah.
almost a definition of the deeper sense of the eighth house, where we're dealing with material that is surrounded by various taboos. It tends to
Hmm.
be driven into the collective unconscious, but also
Yeah.
into the individual unconscious. And so
Hmm.
eighth house statements are often startling like that.
Yes. And I love the opposition with the eighth house and the second house, and
Yeah.
how oftentimes people, when they get really caught up in the minutia of the material, and do I want to spend all of that money on a vacation? Do I want to go into debt? Do I really have, should I be buying the nicer thing instead of buying the cheaper option? And people's reminder statement being, well, you're not going to die with your money,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Eighth
as
house.
that push to be like, swipe the card.
Yeah, it really helps us keep perspective. Second house, that's a fun one to talk about. It's a
Yeah.
standard issue, as you pointed to. It's quite accurate. House of money, it does relate very directly to financial things,
Mm.
but it's so much deeper than that. And
Yes.
when I'm teaching about the second house, something I like to say, maybe I got a class going, and I'll say, I imagine there's somebody out there who is not in this class with us, but wanted to be. She's
Mm.
thinking, I should be in this class. Nah, what if I'm the dumbest person in the class? What if everybody is so much more advanced than me? Maybe
Right.
I'm not really ready to be in one of Stephen Forrest's classes.
Hmm.
I'm not good enough. Ooh, but that's kind of a threatening thing
Mm.
for the ego to hear. And
Yeah.
so what they say, I'd love to go to one of Stephen Farr's classes, but I can't afford it. As soon as you take refuge in money, everybody nods their head. Nobody's going to argue and say, yes, you can afford it. But a lack of confidence in ourselves so often masquerades as a lack of the financial ability to do something. Now, poverty is a
Yes.
reality. Sometimes people just don't have money, and
Hmm.
that needs to be respected. But, honest self-scrutiny with the second house, it's the real issue is confidence in ourselves. And
Yep.
and that just gets tied up with money.
No, entirely. And I'm sure civilization prior to us having printed out paper and coins and bank statements and, online banking, there really was a tie that was more correlated to this, but I always come back to the fact that so much of the same terminology, self-worth, self-value,
Yeah,
can also be tied, worth and value, to finances.
yeah,
Or like, I'm banking on this thing.
yeah,
That
yeah,
there's so much terminology that in this Venn diagram really overlap one another when we discuss the view that we have of ourselves and the finances that we have access to.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. When again, just pursuing this one a little further, is a question I'd like to ask about second house. Makes everybody laugh, but it generates
Mhm.
insight. So I say, money, money. Why is that stuff so popular? And of course, everybody giggles, but then I say, really, there's a serious answer because money buys food and shelter.
Mhm.
Money and has become symbolic of food and shelter, buys other things too, status and fun and all of that, but food and
Mhm.
shelter. And if we don't have food and shelter, we're really scared.
Yeah.
It's that primal. And so actually, probably the core issue in the second house, it's not money,
Mhm.
but survival. You know,
Yes.
and that's why it feels so primal to people.
Mhm. Yeah, it's that foundation. It's a sense of safety. It's, even when we think about the chronological order from the rising sign starting your first house and then everything else that surmounts on top of it, it's almost like, okay, after the moment of birth and becoming and self that exists in the first house, the very next thing is a need to latch and have nutrition.
Yeah, yeah,
So just looking at your birth chart in this way, almost like a baby coming back around to the moment of death, if we're going first to 12th, and not that they're all correlated in that exact same way, but I always like to think the second house is really like everything foundational that we are able to stand upon, like these tiny teething toddlers walking through the
Yeah.
world.
Exactly, exactly. It's a metaphor I sometimes use to actually do houses one, two, and three pretty quickly.
Mhm.
A strong image for starters. We're in an airplane crash. An airplane
Mm,
crash lands, in the jungle, and it might explode, and we're a survivor, and we jump out the door, and we're running away. There's first house energy. It's like here's this emergent situation. Let's escape. So run, run, run,
yeah,
and we're jumping over logs, and then we hit the brakes. That log I just jumped over was a 75-foot anaconda. And
yes,
welcome to the second house cusp, as
yeah,
suddenly the basic fight or flight kind of impulses burn out,
turns on.
we cool a little bit, and we start to realize, uh-oh, where am I? And people stop short. And then just quickly to the third house, the next instinct, look around, where am I? So with that kind of curiosity, we could sort of go around the whole circle, but it's really organic. Everything in astrology, you can feel it in your body
Yeah.
once you get it. It's the map of consciousness.
Yes, and it comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this, that it truly does take a level of not just intelligence, but intuitive understanding of self and others and the world around you to comprehend this ideology. I
Yeah,
know that we're not at the point in humanity to call it a science. I'm sure that science will eventually catch up to what we've all been pouring our blood, sweat, and tears into
yes,
to to help it make sense and allow it to be a tool for others to help themselves with. But there's something to be said about where this kind of crossroads of intellect and understanding and then the intuitive or intuiting starts to come in with astrology. And when you can tap into it, when you can understand these are where maybe my personal planetary placements are in my birth chart. These are the houses that they fall into. This is where I have a stellium or a grouping of planets. This is where a lot of focus is. This is where my ruling planet is. This is where the rest of my chart is answering to. It's like the language itself starts to make sense. And as somebody who's now at the ripe and not so youthful mental age of 30, now coming over to a new country and trying to learn a new language from absolutely zero.
yeah,
um it's made me have such a deeper sense of compassion to people when they're initially going, you know what, I don't understand astrology, so throw the baby out with the bathwater. None of it
yeah,
makes sense, none of it's real. But when you start to get the swing of things and you can respond in the moment to somebody with this language or understand
yeah,
these quote unquote words that are passing you in your own private moments with your birth chart, you go, oh, okay, maybe I don't hate learning the language and maybe there is some
yeah,
value
yeah,
to something other
exactly.
than what I've known.
Yeah, I love it. This is sort of a giggle line. It's vaguely inappropriate, but here it is. It makes me laugh. So I once heard somebody say, uh, "There is no astrological evidence for the validity of science."
Love that.
Yeah, and the reason I'm a little hesitant to say it is, I look forward, like you were saying just a minute or two ago, to a time when astrology is integrated into science. And so I would
Mhm.
want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And by creating a false polarity between astrology and science, maybe I'm moving in the wrong direction. But it's still a funny line, and
It
it,
is.
it does give us a certain perspective, and that science. God bless science at its best, just the search for truth. That's all it ultimately really is. But it has a religious dimension too. And if we read
Mm-hmm.
the history of science, we recognize that essentially, something like three-quarters of the scientists in any age think everybody before us was wrong, but now we have the truth. It's almost been
Wow.
eternally that way. Yeah, Albert Einstein, the initial reaction to Einstein's work was like, Albert, get a grip,
Mm-hmm.
19th century physics, thought it was right, but
Yes.
it wasn't. It was incomplete. And so, the religion of science is opposed to astrology nowadays, but astrology is part of the truth of life. And
Mm-hmm.
anybody who I've never met anybody with the following two traits. They didn't believe in astrology and they knew something about it. Those two traits never exist,
Wow.
together. As soon as you start to give it a chance, you realize, this stuff works and that's cool and that's helpful and we can live better and all the kind of obvious practical things. But there's also this sort of, oh my God, what does that say about the dominant paradigm? What does that
Yeah.
say about what we think of as the truth of life? And here in the 21st century, among educated, a sort of humorous word, people trained in the dominant belief system and therefore deemed to be educated. Among them, the triumphant religion, the central religion, is a kind of existentialist materialism. The idea
Wow.
that life has no inherent meaning. When you die, it fades to black.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of on and on in these common sense ways. I laugh at the term, and there is no astrological evidence for the truth of that. And I
Mm-hmm.
can prove it. And I love it. And so here's one. I hope I'm not rattling on too much, but
No,
this is,
please.
this is fun to say. So synastry, work in the
Yeah.
astrology of relationships. I can look at anybody's chart. And first, not everybody is wired to be in a couple, but
Yeah.
among people who are, the majority of us are. I can look at a person's chart and get a description of what I would call their natural mate. The kind of
Mm-hmm.
person the qualities that are going to be necessary in a person for the relationship to work. I can do that with almost any chart. So let's say a guy is born, a heterosexual story here would work for gay folks too. A guy is born, he's a little baby. I look in his chart, I describe his natural mate. 27 years later, he meets her, he
Mm-hmm.
meets a woman, falls in love, and she looks just like the description in the chart. He has Venus in the seventh house, and she's an artist, and on and on,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And she's 25.
Mm-hmm.
And so his chart described the chart of a person who was not yet born, whom he was
Yes.
destined to meet 27 years later. And that's truth. That
Wow.
story is repeated over and over again. And I just see that, oh my God, kind of look in your face and my face, it's like, that's true. And if that's true, everything else we've been taught about reality is called into question. There's
Yes. And
astrological evidence for the validity of science.
absolutely, Steve. And I feel like that is the Pandora's box that a lot of really scientific or logically driven people are, we go back to this second house traits, like afraid of opening because it would turn everything that we have been told for millennia onto its head and say there's parts of reality that have not yet come to fruition that will play a part in the future, and it ties past present future into this infinity loop that is one of them actually happening before the other. And I think the mass level of confusion that would create is what keeps us from agreeing that this is a science That's my own personal opinion.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's the relationship with Einstein's work. I don't want
Mhm.
to overdo this, but what made Einstein so threatening is that once we recognized that the principles of the theory of relativity were
Mm.
provable and true,
Yep.
most of them, that it knocked the stilts on from underneath the basic principles of science as it existed. Astrology does the same thing. And like the story I just told is one illustration of it. And so I think you know the vitriolic passionate hatred of astrology that we encounter in some circles it reflects this sort of intuitive sense that if we start to accept astrology, we have to question everything we have figured
Everything.
out so far. And it's
Hmm.
true. It's true. We are dangerous to the dominant paradigm, and
Yeah.
we're right.
Hmm. And I see it so clearly in my mind, like a hoarder's house, right? Like if they have all of this information or gunk locked up in a closet, or they've battered
Yeah,
it off to one room in the house, and it's like, I'm fine and I don't have to deal with it so long as I don't open that door.
yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't mean that the clutter doesn't exist there.
Right,
So the
right.
longer that we're prolonging simply opening the door, clearing it out, deciding what does still fit, what could fit better in another area, what may just be clutter and junk that needs to go in the trash. It's like we are trying to avoid an uninevitable truth of what reality truly is just by coming to it with the vitriol, with the disagreement, with the hate, with the confusion. And, you know, I laugh and I let people say like, "Oh, this stinks. Why are you doing this? Another snake oil salesman, a witch, whatever." And of course, like I get it
Yeah,
double with the red hair. It just
yeah,
never ends from childhood until, my dying day when I get to smile on my deathbed. But
yeah.
I will play whatever role I have to play in certain people's stories, so long as I am walking with integrity, knowledge, and intuition about a recognition of patterns that at this point I can't deny.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Once we open our eyes to them, there they are. And we can open the eyes of our clients to them as well.
Yeah,
It was,
and
I think it was Mac,
lovingly.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and to open their eyes lovingly. It's like, I am
Yeah.
so okay. I actually have a long-term client who is a neuroscientist at a
Mhm.
very prestigious school in the States. And our first maybe 5 to 10 sessions were just her getting on the phone with me for an hour and doubting nearly everything that I said to her. And it
Uh-huh.
took years of us working together. And I would get to the point where I would see her booking a session and I wouldn't be agitated, but I would be like, we're just going to get on the phone and fight again for an hour. And eventually, she's sending me photos of these crazy synchronistic things that are happening to her and talking to me about all of these stories that showed so much alignment with her chart and the things that we had talked about and some of the predictive work that we had done together and the evolutionary work that we had done together. And she now is so deeply integrated with astrology while still balancing her work as a neuroscientist. And
Yeah,
part of her
perfect.
work is trying to find intuition in the brain.
I want to ask you approximately how old she is.
So she and I are very similar age. I want to say that she's only a few months older than I am. So she would have already turned 31. But this was pre
Uh-huh.
Saturn return that she and I
Yeah,
started
okay,
working together.
great. The reason I ask, I think I, th- I have a quote pretty accurately here. I think it's Max Planck, one of the early quantum mechanics guys, uh,
Hmm.
who said that a new idea in science does not triumph because people are convinced of it. It
Yeah.
triumphs because the people who hold the antagonistic belief get old and die, and a younger generation comes along who's open to the idea. I thought it was a very good insight, and so
Yeah.
not surprising that this neuroscientist is, up and coming, young in her field, and
Yes.
I found the the vicious rejection of astrology, the knee-jerk,
Mm.
nasty rejection of it,
Mhm.
is much less powerful than it used to be. Even on the
Totally.
science side, I think the majority of astrologers at least that I've talked to, will count science people in their client lists, and generally the younger ones. Quantum
Mhm.
mechanics has really changed everything.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to see where it's going to take us. And it, comes back to why evolutionary astrology is such an important approach in modern day takes, because it not only focuses on the personal evolution, but also the evolution of society. So
Exactly.
I can't wait to see where it goes and where it takes us. And I'm just excited as well, Steve. There's so many things that I could talk to you about, and I'm already getting my wheels turning, and I would be blessed to have you back on to talk about synastry, because the minute that you brought it up, I was like, oh, we
Uh,
need to go over a whole episode with this. But could you tell me and our listeners some of what you're working on right now that is new and upcoming and about to change the landscape of astrology
yeah,
as we know it?
okay, yeah, a couple of things. I have a school, and we started talking about this about 5 years ago, and it's doing really well now. Forrest Center for Evolutionary Astrology. There's various ways of being involved with it. If somebody is full-time student, well, or enrolled to get the full training, 3 or 4 years, zero to mastery in my techniques. Forrest, 2 R's in Forrest. Forestastrology.center is the website for the school. Around the same time, a year or so before I started thinking about the school, one of the strangest friendships of my life started. I'm not an athletically oriented person at all. I don't pay much attention to sports, and Ricky Williams, cover of Sports Illustrated, Miami Dolphins, National Football League, tough guy, Rasta, black fella with hair and and dreads, and he and I are really close now. And of all my astrology students, probably the one who learned how to do it the fastest. He's totally a natural, totally a pro. And he and I and his wife started a thing called Leela, a cell phone app for
Wow.
iPhones or Androids that will it's basically full service astrology, and one this you can it's a subscription thing, but anybody who wants to try it can do it 4 months for free right now. You can go to forestastrology.com, not .center
Hmm.
for my school, but .com, my
Hmm.
website, and scroll down, and it's like last month I did a article introducing Leela and talking about how to get it for free. So I'd encourage all your listeners to go ahead and put it on their phones, and you can enter your birth data of people you love, birth chart analysis, current events, relationship stuff. It's complicated. It's probably 3 or 4 books worth of material that I've already
Wow.
written for this app.
I love this. And I also mentioned at the beginning of our episode that you are a 17-time author
Yeah.
as well. So I'm assuming that your books are on your website
Yeah.
for
Yeah. They're on
purchase.
Amazon and easy to find. Yeah.
Amazing. Steve, this was such a gift to be able to sit down and talk with you about all things evolutionary,
Mm.
fate, destiny, the birth chart in general. You are such a wealth of knowledge, and truly it has been such a gift having you on. I hope that this is the first but not the only time that we will see you on Starcross.
Sounds good. Thank you, Megan. It's been a pleasure for me too.
Thank you, Steve.